6054 Bluffs Drive, was arrested for the murder of Ellie.
A monster with a sinister obsession meticulously planned his attacks, choosing victims who were playing sports alone, believing them to be ideal targets. His chilling stalks were methodical and calculated, each move carried out with a cold precision that left authorities baffled. The terror he inflicted was not only physical, but also psychological. The criminal hunted, stalking potential victims through the streets and carrying out horrific attacks. Only luck and quick reflexes saved women from a fate worse than nightmares. But one young woman found herself in his dark trap. Forensic experts were faced with the daunting task of unraveling the horror of her final moments, revealing a scene of intense suffering and cruelty. As the case progressed, each discovery added to the mounting horror, revealing a calculating, ruthless, and monstrous criminal whose actions defied comprehension. The dark, moonless night seemed to conspire with the silence. The forest, which was usually full of life, now held a secret that no one was supposed to know. A body was discovered in the bushes near a secluded park. A young girl, whose eyes had once glowed with life, were now closed forever. Her body was lifeless and tortured. On her neck were still visible the marks of a brutal struggle for life, and on her hands were traces of handcuffs, which seemed to have been put on not to restrain, but to inspire fear and horror. This was not just a brutal act of violence. It was a show of force and a chilling perversion of the body. The city of Minneapolis, in the northern United States, the largest city in the state of Minnesota and Hennepin County, is located on the banks of the Mississippi River. Founded in 1856, it is now home to approximately 450,000 people. Ellen Weick was born in this wonderful place. Her family affectionately called her Ellie. At 23, she led a quiet life and lived with her parents, who were proud of her creative success. From an early age, she was fond of scrapbooking, attended dance classes, and was able to create elegant jewelry from ordinary metal things. Ellie loved music. She found solitude in it and inspiration for new ideas or jewelry. As a child, her family moved to Westchester, Ohio, where she continued her carefree childhood. Her curiosity was boundless, and she would do anything for a new discovery. This passion for exploring and learning new things did not diminish with age. Ellie enthusiastically grew plants, sewed hammocks, and, approaching the summer of 2018, earned her license in cosmetology. She dreamed of one day creating her own business and making the world just a little bit more beautiful. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until something happened that shattered her idyll. One ordinary day, she received an abusive message from an unknown person on social media. The sender's account was hidden, and this unexpected message was an ominous harbinger of the trouble that was looming over her life. Initially, Ellie didn't pay much attention to the offensive message, thinking it was just a bad joke. But soon, the situation began to deteriorate. Every day, she received similar messages on her social media pages. These threats were coming from different unknown accounts, and no amount of blocking helped. After deleting one stalker, she soon encountered a new one under a different nickname. A similar thing had happened to her about a year ago. But then, after a few blockers, the suspicious messages stopped. This time, the stalker was not going to back down. Using different platforms and devices, it was getting more and more frightening to Ellie, and she began to tell her family about her fears. But the worst was ahead. This bullying continued for a month, and then Ellie was sent a video taken from outside her own home, where she was filmed in the kitchen. The man filming this video stood outside the window and remained silent. In the next frames, he remained outside the window and began undressing and touching himself while watching the unsuspecting girl. This was no longer just an evil joke. It had turned into a real threat. The stalker knew where she lived, and that realization horrified Ellie, forcing her to go to the police. Her fears only intensified when she discussed what was happening with a friend named Hannah. She, too, was alarmed, realizing that this could all end in tragedy. Hannah urged Ellie to contact law enforcement, believing that only the police could keep her safe. Ellie, frightened and determined to act, followed her friend's advice and went to the police. In great detail, Ellie recounted what had happened, providing photos, the threatening messages she had received, and, most frightening of all, the video that had taken her by surprise. The detectives immediately asked the question, did she know her stalker? Ellie had only one guess. One of the accounts from which the threats came was called Mickey. That name didn't mean anything to her, but she had previously had a boyfriend named Michael, with whom they had broken up on a confrontational note a year ago. She didn't believe Michael could have been behind it. It was over. He'd stopped texting her a long time ago and had probably forgotten her by now. The police, however, didn't give her fears much credence. They advised Ellie to take self-defense courses and avoid nighttime walks. The situation did not seem to have caused them any serious concerns. Even when contacted again, it was clear that the stalker had not yet formally broken the law, so they could not take decisive action. Seeing no other option and realizing that she could not count on help from law enforcement, Ellie took the recommendation seriously. She enrolled in self-defense classes with her mother, hoping it would give her some sense of security. But even these measures could not protect her from the horror that was coming. However, all her efforts and precautions could not stop the intruder. The harassment and threats continued with frightening regularity. Investigators were powerless to determine the source of these messages. According to them, the perpetrator used a sophisticated encryption system, carefully covering his tracks. While there are ways to break such defenses, it requires significant time and resources. Given the weak interest of the police in the case, help from them seemed elusive. Ellie found herself alone in the face of a growing threat. She desperately hoped that it would all stop somehow, but fear gripped her more and more. The situation wasn't just not getting better, it was getting more and more threatening. Just a week after she went to the police, an unknown man showed up at her house twice. He was spotted by Ellie's mother, who ran outside both times but found no sign of him. The police also arrived, but each time left with nothing, having found nothing suspicious. The subtle but relentless psychological pressure of the stalker began to have a devastating effect on Ellie. She became increasingly afraid to be alone in the house. Friends, concerned about her condition, often came to support her by staying overnight in her room. However, the stalker seemed to have no problem accessing her home without leaving any visible trace. Ellie sank deeper and deeper into her anxiety and fear. Sleepless nights, constant tension, and the relentless anticipation of another attack. She was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, her life a never-ending struggle for safety and peace of mind. Ellie had barely had time to calm down before anxiety gripped her once again. Just a week later, she received a Snapchat message from a new account with the nickname Mickey. Her intuition immediately signaled that the name was too reminiscent of her ex, Michael Strauss. The puzzle quickly formed in her head, and she decided not to hesitate. She went to the police again, but everything followed a familiar pattern. The same officer, the same indifferent stare. He just shrugged his shoulders indifferently, making it clear that he was not interested in the story of the ex-boyfriend. The police just waved it off, saying they had more important things to do than get into matters of the heart. Ellie was beginning to lose faith in the protection of the law. Remembering how her relationship with Michael had begun, she realized that her anxiety was not unfounded. At 17, she had become infatuated with a guy who shared her passion for art, music, and rowdy parties. However, romance quickly gave way to grim realities. Michael turned out to be not just a romantic, but a manipulator with dark tendencies. He insisted on role-playing, which did not fit her understanding of a normal relationship. Over time, Ellie realized that Michael was a man who was not to be trifled with and decided to end the relationship before it went too far. Michael's reaction was not long in coming. He reacted with cold fury and began stalking her, leaving ominous messages. Ellie had to change her phone number to get rid of his attention. At the time, it helped and everything really calmed down, but the calm didn't last long. And now this Snapchat nickname has awakened her fears again, like a shadow from the past. July 28, 2018, was an evening that fundamentally changed Ellen Wake's life. At that time, the girl was texting with Nate, her boyfriend, who proposed to spend the night together. Ellie, depressed by fears and anxiety, did not dare to leave the house in the dark. Nate promised to come over and stay the night without a cell phone so as not to disturb her. He knocked on the door, and she let him in. But that night, Ellie was very tired and asked Nate to leave early. Ellie planned to go to bed alone that night, not leaving her friends at home as she had been doing for the past few months. She carefully locked the doors and closed the windows, a ritual that had become her only way to feel protected. But that night, the night she should have felt relieved, her sense of security was cheated. The night passed, and Ellie disappeared, leaving behind only worry and fear. When her family was unable to contact her, her mother panicked and called the police. Ellie's car remained parked outside the house, as did her phone, which showed no activity. The police found no trace of her presence in the house, no messages or bank card activity. The cops immediately set out to analyze the latest data from Ellie's phone and soon found correspondence with Nate. But upon further verification, it turned out that the number was registered in another city and had no connection to her boyfriend's real data. Nate, fortunately, had a solid alibi confirmed by other sources. This fake account was so convincing that Ellie, unaware of the deception, revealed her plans. Now her fears and concerns became reality, and she was trapped in a web of lies and manipulation. The number through which Ellie was contacted was purchased through a third-party website, making it difficult to immediately identify the buyer. It wasn't until days later that it was revealed that her ex-boyfriend, Michael Strauss, was behind the purchase. Unfortunately, even after 2 weeks of investigation, there was no information on the whereabouts of the missing woman. However, police were able to establish that Michael had a long list of crimes, including public indecency, sale and use of illegal substances, identity fraud, and burglary. As police began to dig deeper, shocking information about Michael Strauss came to light. His criminal activity stretched back nearly a decade, and in June 2015, he was charged with indecent exposure, which caused the court to question his mental health. Michael was sent to compulsory treatment, which seemed intended to limit his potential for further crimes. But in reality, his manipulations only expanded. Michael began creating fake accounts and messengers on social networks through which he stalked and harassed girls. These messages came from his hometown, where the last number from which Michael contacted Ellie on that fateful night was registered. The number was deactivated immediately after her disappearance. A month after Ellie's disappearance, on August 24, her body was found in a field near town. The remains were found on a road in Butler County, a few kilometers from the township. Police immediately assumed it was the body of a stalker's victim, but because of the horrific degree of decomposition, identification was difficult, necessitating further examination. The victim's remains were found on the side of the road, wrapped in a blanket tied with duct tape, as if the perpetrator was trying to cover up the evidence of his atrocity. The deceased had a plastic bag over her head, presumably the weapon of the crime. The forensic expert had a painstaking job ahead of him. The degree of decomposition of the body made it difficult both to identify the victim and to establish the exact cause of her death. The forensic examination revealed evidence of severe torture. Clearly tortured and abused, the girl had been severely beaten and tied up. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation. The killer put a bag over her head and tied it tightly around her neck, leaving the victim with no chance of escape. The perpetrator didn't seem to be trying to hide his actions. Ellie's body was found just a short walk across a field from the home of 29-year-old Michael Strauss. The gruesome discovery shocked the public and journalists who followed the search for Ellie with bated breath. Family and friends believed to the last that she could be rescued, hoping that she was being forcibly held by the perpetrator and was alive. But sadly, that was not the case. At 4 a.m., the call from the police station came as a heavy blow to the family. The bad news of the final end of their hopes drowned them in grief. The next morning, Michael Strauss was arrested. His detention was a significant event that drew public attention. Police officers struggled to keep the crime scene secret from prying eyes. The area was cordoned off, and forensic experts worked to collect evidence. Drones captured every movement around the suspect's home, and Michael was taken into custody with bail set at $4 million. From the beginning, he was considered a particularly dangerous criminal. At the same time, Michael Strauss's home was searched, and police officers scrutinized the area where Ellie's body was found. DNA samples matching Michael's were found on her remains, confirming his involvement in the crime. During the search, the suspect's computer and cell phone were seized. Their analysis provided disturbing details. Many accounts and phone numbers purchased over the internet belonged to Michael. He changed them regularly to continue to harass and intimidate Ellie after each blocking. Analyzing the data from Michael's computer revealed his dark interests. He actively sought information on murder methods, especially strangulation, sentences, and state laws. He paid special attention to criminals known for their violent crimes. The last request was made on July 18, just 10 days before Ellie's disappearance. In the days that followed, he also researched topics related to surviving in maximum security prisons and the laws of the criminal underworld, indicating his awareness of and preparation for future consequences. Shockingly, he also tried to cover his tracks by studying ways to delete data without the possibility of recovery. In between preparing his crimes, Michael reviewed violent material. Some of the requests uncovered by detectives were so shocking that their contents were decided not to be released to the public. Michael presented himself as an extremely dangerous criminal whose actions went beyond mere stalking. His collection included videos and photos of people jogging in secluded parks. It seems that Michael chose his victims among those who regularly exercised alone, and each of them could be the next target. Unfortunately, Ellie fell into a death trap that Michael had carefully prepared. The psychiatrists working with Michael were wary, but believed that his behavior did not necessarily indicate clear danger. They argued that some maniacs might enjoy simply observing women without directly attacking them. However, this view soon collided with reality. Disturbing evidence emerged that confirmed the worst fears. Michael repeatedly pursued potential victims by car and even committed several assaults. Fortunately, the women were able to escape and avoid further injury. The need to verify new data and expand the list of his crimes became more and more obvious. During the search, a picture of a map on Michael's cell phone was found, marked near the location where Ellie's body was found. This raised serious suspicions, but no new evidence was found when the place was checked. After his arrest, Michael displayed a strange calmness. He tried to justify his internet inquiries and found materials as preparing a script for his horror movie. According to him, he intended to create his own masterpiece, and his pursuit of Ellie was part of an attempt to get into character and write as realistic a script about a maniac as possible. The photos, he claimed, were taken to assess angles before filming. Michael Strauss insisted that the actions were all part of a psychological game he thought was harmless, and that he did not warn Ellie of his intentions to capture her sincere emotions. The prosecutor's office, however, had a different point of view. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence in favor of the prosecution was the discoveries made in Michael's room. Among the items seized were Ellie's driver's license, a strand of her hair, and a pink necklace. Ellie's parents identified the items and confirmed that she always wore the jewelry and never took it off. Investigators concluded that the items were likely collected as trophies, a characteristic of serial offenders who keep victims' belongings to savor the memories of their crimes. During interrogations, Michael displayed surprising smugness and arrogance, as if enjoying his role as the protagonist of a drama. His attempts to throw the police off balance were obvious, and he showed no remorse for his actions. Instead, Michael continued to weave incredible excuses, trying to convince investigators that he had no idea why Ellie had been murdered or why her body had been found near his home. He claimed that the items found in his possession, a driver's license and a necklace, were left by Ellie as a token of remembrance of their relationship. However, this explanation seemed fictitious, as the girl never removed her jewelry and her driver's license could not have been in Michael's possession at the time. It was a clear sign of deception. When the investigators changed the tactics of interrogation and began to press him, Michael began to give contradictory testimony. He admitted that the incident was an accident and, according to him, arranged with Ellie to shoot an erotic video with elements of torture for his movie, offering her several $1,000s. He claimed that she agreed to the filming. According to his version, when he arrived at her house, Ellie came out to him wrapped in a blanket so as not to attract the attention of neighbors, and they went to Michael's house together. There, Michael allegedly started filming, and they went down to the basement. He handcuffed Ellie, he said, and began to abuse and torture her. In the course of this, he claimed, Ellie accidentally choked to death because of the bag over her head. Michael continued to insist that the filming was consensual and that he himself didn't realize how Ellie died. Afterward, he allegedly deleted the footage and threw away the memory card. Despite the detailed description, Michael's version sounded implausible and raised many questions. The very fact that he continued to claim for so long that everything was consensual seemed unlikely and only emphasized his attempts to avoid responsibility. During the search of Michael Strauss's home, the police discovered a sinister handcuffed bed in the basement that served as a grim testament to the horrific events. The place, full of an intimidating atmosphere, was thoroughly investigated by forensic experts. Extracted drops of blood and strands of hair were identified by DNA tests as belonging to Ellie. This evidence made Michael's version of Ellie's voluntary participation in the film completely unbelievable. Law enforcement officials did not believe the suspect's story that Ellie had allegedly agreed to participate in the filming. They knew that Michael had pretended to be Ellie's new boyfriend to lure her out of the house. The family also found it unbelievable that Ellie could have agreed to such filming voluntarily. It was obvious that the girl had been the victim of a kidnapping and brutal abuse, brought to a fatal end. Michael's description of Ellie's last minutes of life, full of horror and pain, sounded so cold-blooded that it was as if he was describing a normal working day. Following Michael's arrest, police began receiving numerous reports from witnesses. They also received calls from victims who were convinced that Michael had been involved in a number of other crimes. Despite the hard work of the police, it took the help of FBI agents to uncover all of Michael's criminal activities. The agents had to sort through extensive digital evidence and build a psychological profile of the perpetrator. As a result, the charges against Michael included counts of aggravated murder, tampering with evidence, theft, and abuse of a body. The evidence reached 800 pages, each of which was shown to the jury during the trial. Nevertheless, the defense presented its version of events. Michael Strauss's lawyer insisted that 23-year-old Ellie, of her own volition, went to the filming fully aware of all the risks and dangers. He argued that the murder was accidental and not premeditated. The defense attorney also focused on the suggestion that Ellie may have suffered from depression caused by a possible drug overdose. However, a toxicology report showed that no drugs or alcohol were found in the victim's blood at the time of death. This finding made the defense attorney's argument of depression merely a misplaced attempt to shift blame. For Ellie's family, such an assumption was insulting, given that her troubled state was the result of Michael's longtime stalking behavior. As the preliminary hearing drew to a close, Michael suddenly made a shocking announcement. He pleaded guilty.
I stand here before you today, not to make excuses, or to beg for.
This admission came as a relief to the family of the deceased, saving them from having to listen to the details of how their daughter died. However, the admission also meant that the charges were revised, and at least 6 counts from the original list of charges were dropped as part of the deal. This caused disappointment for many, as the perpetrator received a lighter sentence. During the sentencing, Strauss addressed Ellie's family with a remorseful apology. "Please believe that I never meant to hurt anyone. If there was a chance to bring Ellie back, I would trade places with her that very second." These words were seen as manipulative and devoid of sincerity, while Strauss's mother, who later reached out to Ellie's family, expressed sincere regret, admitting that she did not expect her son to become such a monster. The prosecutor's office demanded the maximum penalty for Michael, while the defense counsel asked for a reduced sentence based on the client's admission of guilt and remorse. Michael Strauss heard his sentence in silence, which was only occasionally interrupted by barely restrained sobs in the courtroom. Life in prison with parole after 15 years, plus a year and a half for threatening and harassment, and another year for abuse of the body. The judge ruled that the sentences should run consecutively, as if weighing each of the defendant's sins. Arguing his decision, he said that despite the heinousness of the crimes, Strauss deserved a chance for a retrial. This gave him the phantom possibility of leaving prison in 2036. If conditional release is not granted, then the next attempt will be in 2041. The reaction of the victim's family was immediate and furious. For them, the verdict was a blow. The possibility that their daughter's killer would one day be free again seemed to them a mockery of justice. They were determined that they would attend every parole board hearing, fighting to ensure that the perpetrator would never leave prison. Their pain and anger turned into a goal: to keep Michael from returning to society and to protect others from the horror he brought into their lives. We will also note a very important point in this matter. After the accused was sent to jail, Ellie's family and friends began to fight for justice. They appealed to the prosecutor's office, demanding punishment for the police officers who, in their opinion, failed to protect the girl despite her desperate pleas for help. An internal investigation soon began, which revealed blatant violations. One of the investigators refused to accept information properly and failed to conduct a thorough investigation to verify Ellie's words. That very moment was the beginning of the end of Ellie's life. As a result, the officer was suspended, but nothing could bring Ellie's life back. Not long after his time behind bars, Michael told a cellmate shocking some of his dark secrets from his past. It turned out that 23-year-old Ellie was far from his only victim. In his jail cell, Michael apparently decided that honesty was the best way to pique his interest. He recounted how he dealt with another girl named Shelley, whom he stalked and tormented in the same gruesome pattern as Ellie. They say he dumped her body in a creek where no one would look, and police were never able to find evidence to back up what he said. In January 2018, the station received a report from a girl who was being chased by a certain suspicious man wearing a black hooded sweatshirt and a mask. The creep grabbed her by the head in a park where she was exercising and dragged her into the bushes, demanding that she shut up. Luckily, she managed to fight back and escape. This incident no doubt set everyone on edge, but the results of the inspection were not particularly successful. It was unclear whether or not the man was connected to Michael. In August 2011, 22-year-old Kathleen Markham went missing in Fairfield, Ohio, right after a party where Michael was in the picture with her and her boyfriend. 2 years later, in 2013, her remains were found in Cedar Grove, Indiana. Police are still trying to find out if Michael Strauss was connected to these horrific cases from the past.